But there's another little fact that I'm sure some of you know about, which is they discovered oil some years ago, and in 1998 they started pumping it. 75% of the known reserves of Sudan are in the south, not the north. But the pipeline to ship the oil goes through the north to Port Sudan for export. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the north and the south economically, even though they hate each other. There's no other word to put it. They despise each other. Southern Sudan is African. It is principally a cattle culture. There are more cattle per capita in southern Sudan than any other country in Africa. They name all 10 million cows they have, cattle, have named 3 names. There are poems, epic poems written to the cows. Every cattle boy who takes care of the cows knows every cow's name. They don't eat their cows unless the cow dies. They milk them and they live off the milk, but they don't like killing the cows, so they keep expanding. Now it's a big place, so they can still keep the herds going, but their entire culture is around the cattle. It's a beautiful culture in many respects, and I've come to admire and love over the years. The South also has some of the richest soil in Africa, 60 feet of black topsoil, very similar to the southern Mississippi River. So much so that they say they could feed all of Africa and half the Arab world, just in the lands of southern Sudan. We thought all of the wild animals, there were vast wild animal herds in the south, and we thought most of them were eaten by the rebels or the government troops during the civil wars. And in fact, there are almost no wild herds left west of the Nile River. The Nile River goes north to south through Sudan and cuts the country in 2 parts. We sent in Michael Fay from National Geographic, this is USAID, and a great naturalist scientist from southern Sudan with AID staff, and we found 2.5 million wild animals, massive herds, in the eastern part of the south, what's called the Sud, which is one of the greatest marshes in the world. It's a wetland. It's sort of like the Kalahari in Africa. It's an extraordinary place. Several of the varieties of animals, they were antelope, we thought were virtually extinct. We found 50,000 still alive and healthy in eastern Sudan. So there's a potential for a vast tourist industry in southern Sudan. And most importantly, the Nile River goes through southern Sudan. Egypt is going to run out of water, not run out of water, the amount of water going into the Nile River by the year 2017 will be less than the amount of water being used by the Egyptians. So gradually, after 2017, the Nile River is going to decline, just lower and lower and lower. And the Egyptians are extremely worried about it. The Ethiopians are building a huge dam on one part of the Nile River, and the northern Sudanese are building 5 new dams north of Khartoum. So the Egyptians have a profound interest in what happens in Sudan. And in fact, they interfere all the time in Sudan, because if there's no Nile River, there's no Egypt. Egypt would be just one giant desert, and it cannot support 80 million people in the middle of the desert. So they're very worried about what's going to happen to the Nile, which flows through, and the marshes feed the Nile River. So we have a lot of interests here. It's the gateway to Africa. The closest ally of Sudan in the north, for the last 25 years of Omar al-Bashir's reign, 24 years, is Iran. Ahmadinejad goes regularly to Khartoum, and Bashir goes often to Iran. The reports are that the Sudanese leadership of Bashir's radical Islamist party has bought extensive property in both Kuala Lumpur, but also particularly in Tehran, so if they get thrown out by a coup, they have a place to go. And there's also reports of widespread corruption in the north. There's a WikiLeaks cable that came out of the U.S. government which said that Bashir had stolen about $9 billion out of the national treasury. There's also corruption problems in the south, because the south doesn't have institutions. It's a new country. They didn't have any government before. They've been at war since 1956, essentially the one 11-year respite in the 1970s. And so the south is very underdeveloped, with 70% illiteracy rates in the south. very high child mortality rates, which we're working on now.